Can you see my slide? Can anyone confirm?
Yes.
All right. So good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining our session on TDS, tax deducted at source. This is the second session. So this session we are going to talk about common payments. When I say common payments that are generally in use in most of the businesses that we come across. There are, as I said in the earlier session, there are about 33 payments on which tax deduction at source TDS will be applicable. We are not going to talk about each one of them, because most of them may not be applicable to all kind of businesses. So what we are talking is only those TDS provisions that are applicable to many of the participants in this session. So today we'll be talking about payments. So before we talk about payments, we'll have a very quick recap of what we discussed in the last session. So last session we spoke of how the entire modus operandi of TDS. So essentially we spoke of who is liable to deduct TDS. It is of the person who is making the payment, and on what kind of payment is he required to deduct TDS. It is if the amount is taxable in the hands of the receiver, then it is subject to TDS provisions under the provisions of the Income Tax Act. And when is the payer required to deduct TDS? It is always payment or credit, whichever is earlier. So payment is when you make the actual payment. Credit is when you make entry in your books of accounts, crediting the party to whom the amount is payable. The exception to this is salaries, where salaries TDS is deducted on payment. So at the time of payment, you deduct salaries and not at the time of credit. And how much do you deduct TDS? It is always the rate that's specified in the provisions of the Act. Each section which deals with a particular payment also defines a specified rate on which TDS has to be deducted. For instance, it is either 1%, 2%. It varies between 0.1% and goes up to 10% in the normal cases. In case of no PAN is available, it becomes 20%, or the rate applicable, which is higher. However, in the case of salary, we saw that there are no rates specified. It has to be calculated, computed, and an average of that tax taken on a monthly basis has to be deducted. So this is the overall modus operandi of TDS. Then we also saw in detail about salaries. We will have just a summary of them today. Salaries, the section that deals with salaries is 192. The payer, which is always the employer, is liable to deduct TDS whenever a salary is paid. What kind of employer is required to pay? While most of the sections of TDS talks about a payer who is any person other than an individual HUF, whereas when it comes to salaries, everyone, even if it is an individual who employs a person on whom a salary is paid, which exceeds the basic exemption limit, which is rupees 2,50,000 rupees, which is what he gets as a taxable income, then TDS is deductible. When is it deductible? At the time of payment, as I said earlier. And what is the amount? It is the estimated amount. So you calculate the amount for the entire year, calculate the investment deductions, and if loss, if any, but only loss that can be set off is the loss from house property. Compute the total income, arrive at the tax, divide the entire tax into the number of months that is available for deduction. So suppose he's working for the entire year, it will be 12 months. If he's working for part of the year, it will be the number of months he's working on which salary is payable, and that is where the word average comes into. This is as far as salaries are concerned. So last session we saw basic and salaries. Today, in this session, we'll talk about common payments. By the way, the Income Tax Act does not use the word common payment. I have used it for the purpose of ease of understanding. So the first of the payments is interest. So there are two sections on interest, but I'm going to talk about only one. The first section, which I'm not going to talk about, is interest on security. The reason why we are not talking, it's mostly applicable to public limited companies where interest is paid on securities, and it is not applicable to most of the private limited companies who are participants in this session. We are not talking about it. Coming to interest on payments other than interest on securities. This is applicable to almost every business. Whoever is paying interest, they will be liable to this section. What is this? The section that deals with is 194A. Remember earlier section, I told you the reason I'm quoting section numbers in this presentation, whereas we generally don't quote sections for these kind of sessions. The reason I'm quoting sections is when you fill up a form to deposit TDS, you are required to quote to the section, because there will be a code which will have a reference to the section on which the tax is deductible. So this section talks about, this section is 194A, which talks about interest other than interest on security. Who's liable to pay or who's liable to deduct TDS? Any person other than individual or SU, which means individual and SU are not required to pay, except, again, last session, it is just a point of note. It is important that you attend all the sessions of the TDS series so that you understand TDS on an overall gamut. So in the last session, I mentioned that individual HUF, unless they cross a particular limit, which will be 1 crore in the case of business and 50 lakhs in the case of profession, they are not required to deduct TDS. So other than that category, any person who pays interest will have to deduct TDS. And to whom a payment has to be made if TDS is applicable? Any resident person. So any person, it can be an individual, it can be a company, it can be a trust, it can be business home, anybody who is a resident. All the provisions that we are discussing will generally talk about a resident person, because any payment made to non-residents is dealt separately. So what is the rate at which TDS has to be deducted for interest? It is 10%. So if you pay 10,000 rupees as interest, 10% on it, 1,000 rupees has to be deducted as TDS. Is there a limit? Yes, that's a limit. Up to 5,000 rupees, a payer is not required to deduct TDS. In the case of bank, it will be 40,000 or 50,000, based on whether you are a senior citizen or not. Again, which we will not be talking, because we do not have any bank as participant in this. So consider for anybody other than person carrying on the business of banking, it is going to be 5,000, which is the limit. Any interest paid in extra 5,000 rupees, you have to deduct TDS at 10%. Now, I kept on saying interest. So what does this interest mean? What kind of interest is liable to TDS? So interest paid in respect of any money borrowed. So I'm a businessman, I borrow money. Obviously, when I borrow money, there will be certain terms and conditions. The first and foremost will be the interest payable. A certain percentage of the loan amount borrowed will be charged as interest. So any interest paid in respect of monies borrowed will attract TDS under this section. When it comes to business, very commonly you will find intercorporate deposits or loans. What is it? I have two business corporate, two companies. One company has borrowed money from another company, which is termed as intercorporate deposit, and the borrower pays interest to the person who was lent, the lender. So in that case, TDS is payable. Then if you have taken deposits from public, the private limited companies cannot do it, but generally this section talks about any deposits that you take from the public. If you pay interest, TDS under this section is applicable. Loans is very common. You would get loans from banks, NBFCs, even from private parties. So any loan, any interest payable on loan, if the interest amount is more than 5,000 rupees, TDS is liable to be deducted. The last one is, these are only examples. These are not the list that is provided in the Act. That is only the example. Supplier on late payment of bills. So what is this? Very common that I am a supplier, or in other words, I buy goods from the supplier who supplies goods to me, and there is a delay in payment of money to the supplier, and the supplier charges me an interest. And when I pay an interest on that outstanding, and if that amount is more than 5,000 rupees, TDS is deductible. A very common mistake that happens in small and medium-sized businesses, they tend to not deduct TDS from this kind of payment. A payment to a supplier for late payment of bills. So this is one example. There are certain exceptions where you don't have to deduct TDS. What is that? One is interest paid to bank. Obviously, you would have not seen when you pay interest to bank, you are not required to deduct TDS. The reason is specifically the Act provides for exemption. The other one is very common in partnership firms. When an interest is paid to partners by a firm, TDS is not required to be deducted. So two exceptions. There are many exceptions, by the way. When I'm talking about only exceptions which are applicable in general. For instance, if you make a payment to a cooperative society, if you make an interest to a government, blah, 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 those are all exempt, but we are not going to talk about that because it is not applicable for general business clauses. The next one, and a very important section, is the payment to contractors, particularly business in and around Hosur. Many of them would come under this category, or they would be either a recipient or a payer to contractors. So the section that deals with payment to contractors is section 194C. Payer again, any person other than individual and HUF is required to deduct TDS. The recipient should be any resident contractor, and any contractor who is resident in India is should be the recipient for the section to be attracted. And what is the rate? If the payment made to the contractor is either an individual or an HUF, then it will be 1%, essentially a non-corporate client. Then it will be 1% on the payment. If it is others, for partnership firm, company, either private limited or public limited company, or any other form of enterprise, the rate of deduction should be 2% on the amount on which payment is made. What is the limit? Limit is for any payment which is a very single payment, which is in more than 30,000 rupees, TDS gets attracted. Or if the payment is less than 30,000 rupees, but in an aggregate in a year, if the payment is more than 1 lakh rupees, then again TDS is applicable. We will talk about this limit in detail in subsequent slides. Just hold on. So what are contractor payments? So any work done, carrying out any work, or for carrying out that work, labor are supplied. So supply of labor for carrying out any work, or it can be subcontract. So when you as a business entity give a person to carry out any work, it can be any kind of work, or you give it to a person who supplies the labor. He just gives a bunch of people for you to carry on that work, or it is a subcontract. Subcontractor is giving the work, the contractor gives the work to another person to execute the subcontract. So all this will fall under this clause of 194C, where it will attract TDS provisions and is liable to deduct TDS. We look at few cases of work which has been defined by the Income Tax Act itself. They specifically say it includes advertising, broadcasting, and telecasting. Essentially, if you give any work for advertising, then TDS becomes deductible on those payments. Very important is the carriage of goods or passengers. So when a payment is made to goods carrier or a passenger carrier, let's take the case of Ozur. You would have seen in many companies hire bus to transport their employees from their home to office, and a payment is made. So section 194C will fall under that. Or they hire vehicles to transport their goods, it will attract provisions of 194C. The only exception is if goods are transported by railway, any payment made to railway, TDS is not required to be deducted. The third one is catering. Again, very common in all industries. But after a particular, when a manufacturing industry or any industry has more than a particular number of people, generally they have a catering services. So what they do, they hire a caterer who provides the catering services, and a payment is made to that caterer. That will fall under this section 194C, and TDS has to be deducted on that payment as well. And the other example is manufacturing supply of products according to specification of customer. So I am a customer, I engage another contractor and say that you will have to manufacture a particular good according to the specification that I give. So that becomes again a subcontract, contract work. So provisions of 192C, which is payment of deduction of TDS for contract services, will be applicable. So these are the examples of payments on which TDS will be deductible under the section which applies to payment to contractors, that is 194C. Okay, I told you I will come back to you on that limit. Limits, when it comes to limits, the first and foremost is a single payment. Whenever you make a payment to a contractor and the payment is more than 30,000 rupees, TDS is applicable. So 10,000, you don't have to worry about it. 30,000, if there's a bill for 30,001, then TDS becomes attractive, one single bill. However, my bills are not 30,000, it's all less than that. But then a cumulative figure or an aggregate or a total becomes more than 1 lakh. So for instance, I have 4 bills, 20,000, 5 bills, 20,000, 20,000, 20,000, it becomes 1 lakh. Anything in excess of that, then the provisions of TDS is applicable. So what the business has to be very careful when it comes to 194C is, normally these contract work, they get into an agreement to provide that service, contractor services. So when they sign up an agreement, if they know that if they sign up for an amount more than 1 lakh for a year, then from the first payment, they have to deduct TDS. This is a normal mistake that's done by business. Care has to be taken. An agreement is entered, more than 1 lakh in that agreement. From the first rupee paid, TDS has to be deducted. There is a circular to this effect, and this is binding There's a notification, in fact, and it is binding. There's another circular which says, during agreement, the parties do not envisage a payment of more than 1 lakh. However, during the period, the payment crosses 1 lakh, then the amount paid, the TDS should be deducted on the entire amount right from the beginning. So suppose I did not, at the time of agreement, I only envisaged 70,000, so which means TDS is not required to be deducted. But over the period of time, it crosses more than 1 lakh. So from for the entire 1 lakh, TDS at 1% or 2%, whatever is applicable, has to be deducted and paid. There is a very important exception to payment for contractors. That is payment for hiring or leasing goods carriage. If that contractor gives a declaration to the payer that he does not own more than 10 vehicles, and he provides a PAN number, provides his PAN number, then TDS is not required to be deducted. So I am a contractor who is in the business of flying or running the goods carriage, and I give you my services of hiring and leasing. Or because goods carriage payment is required to be, TDS is applicable. But suppose I give a declaration that I do not have any more than 10 vehicles, and I give my PAN number, and you are a payer, then you don't have to deduct TDS. This is an important exception, and this has to be kept in mind while deducting TDS under 194C. The next payment, again, commission and brokerage. Commission and brokerage is dealt by section 194H, whose any person other than individual and HCF, subject to that condition, if they are making a payment, they will have to deduct TDS under 194H, and the recipient has to be shall be any resident person. And what's the rate? The rate is 5%. Limit again is 15,000 rupees. So as I told you in my first session, always remember TDS in these parameters. Section, who should be the payer, who should be the recipient, what is the rate, and if there is a limit. Because the entire applicability, limit and rate depends on these parameters. So in this case of commission, it is 5% on any payment exceeding rupees 15,000 in a year. So what is commission and brokerage? So any payment to a person acting on behalf of another person. So what does it mean? Actually, it is an agent. So when a payment is made to a person who is acting on your behalf, who is your agent, then the provisions of this section gets applicable. And for what are the services? So suppose the agent provides any services, and that services can be in relation to supply and purchase of goods, or it can be in relation to any other assets, maybe selling or buying of immovable property, selling and buying of some valuable goods, or any article. So any services that he provides for which a commission or a brokerage is paid, the provisions of TDS under this section will be applicable. And yeah, we have spoken of the rate. It's 5% on any payment in exceeding 15,000 rupees. The next, again, very common expenditure is rent. The section that deals with this 194I, payer can be any person other than individual and HCF, and the person who gets the money, the recipient, has to be any resident person. The rate will be 2% or 10%. We'll talk about it in the subsequent slide. Again, limit is 2,40,000 rupees per annum. Again, we will talk about in detail about this limit as well. So rate. So there are broad two categories of assets on which the rent is paid. So rent on plant, machinery, and equipment is 2%. Rent on land, building, or furniture is 10%. Again, normally people are good at deducting TDS on land, rent on land and building. They generally forget the other components, plant, machinery, equipment, or furniture. So when I say that, so what are plants? Plants are generally the entire combination of your plant, machineries and other equipment for the running of the business. Equipment generally are smaller parts. You might buy a particular a smaller machine, even furniture. Again, furniture is no problem. In this case, I've seen in technology companies they have higher laptops. They tend to forget deduction of TDS. Laptops will fall under the category of plant, and the TDS is required to. Suppose you get a printer on rent. Again, that would classify either under plant or equipment, and then 2% TDS has to be deducted on the rent paid on that. Plant, building, and furniture generally categorized as immovable property. Any rent paid on that will fall under 10% category. So examples of rent is, it can be either rent, lease, sublease. On what kind of assets? It can be on land, building, including factory building. So it can be commercial building. It can be a factory building. Any kind of building is applicable. Machinery, plant, equipment, and furniture or fitting. So all this category of assets on which rent is paid, lease is paid, sublease is paid, then TDS under this section will be applicable. So what's the limit? The limit is 2,40,000 rupees per annum. A very important point to note in this is, if it is the assets are owned by more than one owner, which is called joint owner, each of them can avail this limit of 2,40,000 rupees. So for instance, to take a building on rent, which is owned by 2%, and so you will have to apply. So 2%, 2,40,000 into 2, 4,80,000 will be the limit, and it is to be applied on individual owners. So it's a very good provision, so that you can, if they are joint holders, the limit gets extended, and they also get the benefit of sharing the rent. A very, very important catch in this section is, the person who is receiving the money as rent, he need not be owner, which means you could be paying, the business could be paying rent to a person who has taken it on rent and subleased it to you, sublet it, so, or even for that matter, by whatever means he could be holding that asset, be in possession of that, and rented it to the business, rented it to you, and you will be paying. So it does not matter whether the recipient of the rent is the owner of the asset or not, TDS becomes payable. TDS becomes deductible. Again, few common challenges that comes up in rent. Whenever you have rent, whenever an asset is taken on rent, normally it is an convention to pay deposits. So there are three categories. The deposits can be categorized with three possibilities, and let's see the applicability of TDS. First is the adjustable deposit, meaning a deposit is given at the time of taking the asset on rent, but this is adjustable against subsequent rent. Then what happens? TDS becomes deductible on that, because essentially this deposit is going to become a rent at some point in time. So adjustable deposit, TDS is applicable. Second is non-refundable deposit. The difference between adjustable deposit and non-refundable is you can adjust or you may not adjust also. Whereas non-refundable, at the time itself you say, yes, it is not a refundable deposit and you give it, then TDS becomes applicable on non-refundable deposit. The third category is refundable deposit. So only when a refundable deposit is paid, TDS provisions is not applicable. You don't have to deduct TDS. In the case of adjustable deposits and non-refundable deposits, TDS is liable to be deducted. The next category of payment is the professional fee, and a very common payment that is applicable to most of the business. So it is professional and technical services. Section 194J talks about it. And the payer can be any person, again, other than the individual entity, and recipient can be any resident person. What's the rate? Rate is 10% in common. However, we'll discuss about the rates in subsequent slides as well. The limit is again 30,000 rupees per annum. Again, there are certain conditions. We'll talk about the limit also in subsequent slides. So quickly, 194J talks about professional and technical services. Payer can be any person and recipient has to be a resident professional or a resident person, in fact, and the rate is 10%. The limit is 30,000 rupees. Any payment more than 30,000 rupees, TDS becomes applicable on this. So what are professional and technical services? This is always a point of contention as to what falls under what category. However, there are certain parameters which we need to take into consideration. Professional services. Who are professionals? Legals, that is lawyers, doctors, engineers, architects, accountants, chartered accountants, cost accountants, kind of them, technical consultants, interior decorators, and advertisers. Any payment made to these categories will purely fall under professional services, and TDS will be deductible at 10%. Fees for technical services defined as any services for managerial, technical or consulting services, and it also includes services for which labor is provided or technical or other personals are provided. So suppose there's a firm that provides person to work in the business on a technical services, then again that will come under fees for technical services. So apart from this too, remuneration, fees and commission paid to director. An important point to note here is any director of a company who is engaged, who is also involved as an employee, then any remuneration paid to the director will be subject to tax as salary. If they are not directors, if they are not full-time directors, they are kind of executive directors, or they only come for board meetings and a fees is paid, or any commission is paid to directors for getting some services like sales or any consulting. So these remunerations, fees and commissions paid to directors who are not employees will come under this category of professional and technical services. 10% TDS has to be deducted. Then royalty, any royalty paid will come under this category. Non-compete fees. What is non-compete fees? Suppose normally a fees is paid for not getting involved in a particular kind of business or profession. Suppose there is one a person who is let's say a lawyer who was part of a firm and he quits the firm. They get into an agreement saying that okay, you should not practice in this particular area, or you should not practice for some more years, and for which fees is paid. That's called non-compete fees. Any payment on the category of non-compete fees will again fall under section 194J, and TDS has to be deducted at 10%. Rate for professional fees is 10%. If it is technical fees, 2%. Any payment to call center is 2%. So remember that there is a very thin line between technical services and professional fees. In case there is a doubt as to whether it falls under technical fees or professional fees, because there has always been a lot of contention in this area, it is always better to deduct under professional fees at 10% to avoid litigation. So what's the limit for all categories, that is professional services, technical services, royalty and non-compete fees? It is 30,000 rupees per annum. Any payment in excess of 30,000 rupees will attract TDS 10% or 2%, as the case may be. When it comes to director's fee, there is no limit, which means the entire amount TDS is liable to be deducted. Even if it is going to be 1 rupee for a director's fee, then TDS has to be deducted on that amount, entire amount. Okay, now we'll get into a category of payments. See, all these payments, whatever we saw so far, are payments made by business people. So we saw salaries, because they engage people for business purposes, salaries is paid. We saw rent, again, category for rent paid for their business purposes. Professional fees paid for their business purposes. Interest paid for their commercial purposes. However, in the last few years, if you look at the last 4 or 5 years, the government has started adding up payments made by individuals also under the category of TDS. So we'll see those sections. So these are payments by individuals. So which means irrespective of what you do, if you are an individual and paying this in their individual capacity, not from a business perspective, individual capacity, then these provisions will be applicable. The first and the foremost is immovable property. When you buy an immovable property. So when you buy an immovable property, it can be an individual and HCF, and you buy it from any person any resident person, or a person resident in India who's the transferor, and the payment to that is more than 50 lakhs, then 1% has to be deducted. By the way, the section number quoted is not correct. It's not 194(1)A. It is actually 194(M). So I stand corrected on that. So 50 lakhs and above. This 50 lakhs is inclusive of all parking, maintenance, and facilities. So when the section was originally envisaged, it was not added. Then subsequently it was added. So which means suppose you buy a apartment and the apartment cost is 45 lakhs. Parking charges is 2.5 lakhs. Maintenance is another 2.5 lakhs. Facilities is another 2 lakhs. So what happens? It becomes 52 lakhs. So then TDS at 1% has to be deducted. And in this case, so let's assume that I am going to buy a property. I'm not engaged in any business. I will not have any TAN number. If you go back to my original, the first session, I told you that the first and foremost that is required for deducting TDS is the TAN number. So in these cases, TAN number is not required. Because individuals, they are not required to have TAN number, and this will be one of a case of payment. So TAN number is not required. So 1% on the amount. So 50 lakhs, 1% deduct and remit. There is a form 26QB on which you will have to make the payment. and the TAN number is not required for that. Then comes rent on land and building. Again, this rent is different from the rent that we saw when it comes to other than individual secure, where the limit was 2,40,000. This is the case where I am an individual, not necessarily to be associated with business. However, I am living in a house for which the rent is more than 50,000 rupees. Then TDS at 5% has to be deducted. And when is it to be deducted? The TDS is to be deducted the last month. So take the entire amount of TDS as paid during the year, calculate 5%, deduct it in the last month, and remit the amount. A question may arise: what if the tenant? What if I vacate the house in between? Instead of March, I vacated in June. So it says January. That is the last month. In that month, you will have to deduct TDS and remit it. Payment of certain sums by individuals. So any work contract, commission, or professional fees. What does it mean? Now I am an individual. I engage an architect for constructing my house, or I engage an contractor for constructing my house. I have nothing to do with business. Then whenever if the payment to this professional people, a contractor or a commission paid for purchase of an immovable property, it exceeds 50 lakhs in a year, then 5% TDS is deducted. Again, in this case, TAN is not required. So all these three cases, as I told, this is not necessarily related with business. However, a payment is made by individual. There is a limit. Always it is on the higher side is 50 lakhs. So TDS is deducted. These provisions came up in the last few years to ensure that even payments made by individuals is within the gamut of TDS, and the information goes to the income tax department. So, so these are the payments that we dealt in for today. So we spoke about payments of rent, interest, professional fees, and payments by individuals in the name of purchase of property, payment of rent. So next session, we'll be talking about 194Q along with 206 HI1C, which is sale of goods. And then we'll also talk about consequences of non-deduction. So somebody in the last section was asking about, we will be talking about 194Q. We'll also talk about, I will also touch upon 194R because we have already done a separate full session on that, but we'll also try to cover the summary of that in the next session as well. Thank you. I'm opening it to questions. Last 10 minutes, I've always promised for Q&A. You can unmute yourself and ask questions.
Hello, sir. Hello.
Hello. Yeah.
Bhaskar here.
Yes.
Sir, I have 3 questions. One is advertisement. Your advertisement comes in the 194C or 194J.
The advertisement is specifically, the Act has given 194C. It has specified advertisement, so you can deduct under 194C. See, but however, one thing you should always see between 194C and 194J is, if a service is provided on a professional basis, say for instance, for the purposes of advertisement, you are into production of advertisement and you engage a profession who gives professional services in relation to advertisement, then 194J will apply. You bring an artist and he provides the service, then 194J will apply. Suppose you engage a sports person. Today in advertisement, it's very common that you have sports person, right? You have Tendulkar or Dhoni to come and act in your advertisement. Then 194J in respect of that payment will be applicable. However, in the case of pure payment to advertising agency, you give an advertisement in TV, you give an advertisement in newspaper, then 194C will be applicable.
Then second, event management. It comes under CRJ.
Event management, again, there is a very important case law in respect of that. Event management, see, if you are giving the entire event management, this is my opinion, if you give the entire event management to somebody, right, you are essentially subcontracting the work, then 194C will be applicable.
Okay. Then rent by an individual 50K you are mentioned, that is limit per year or an individual rent? Monthly rent.
50K is, sorry if I had not mentioned it correctly, 50K is per month. And what is that you are? 50K is per month?
Rent paid by individual to individual person. It is limit is mentioned only 50K. That is annual limit or monthly limit?
It is monthly limit. It's monthly limit.
It's monthly limit. So if a rent paying by anybody to anyone 50K, then TDS is applicable.
Correct.
In that case, every time you have to pay through PAN number only?
No PAN is required for that.
PAN is not required, but PAN is required.
PAN is not required, and also it is not required to be deducted every month. You can deduct in the last month and make the payment.
50K means 10% means
5%. It is 5%.
5%.
Not 10%.
Last month there won't be any rent to pay, no? More than 70% rent will go for TDS.
How, no? 5%, it will be only 60%, no?
50 into 5% means 2,500 into 12 months. So more than 50% will go.
60%, no? 60%.
Yeah.
5 12 are 60.
Yeah.
60%
So
you have to deduct. Yeah.
Okay. So it is 50K per month.
50K per month.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello. Yeah, this is Chandrasekhar. Sir, actually, we are using ERP. They are maintaining that ERP software for if it is an issue, they will solve. For that purpose, we are paying every quarter some payment, which is comes under 94J or 94C. Oh, sorry, technical
No,
fees.
I'm not getting. You are paying for ERP consultant, is it?
Yeah, correct.
ERP consultant, 194J, clear case.
J, right? It is in technical or professional?
Better do it in professional. See, don't do it in technical, it is professional.
Yeah, actually that guy argued me with some details and told me, sir, it's a technical service, not a professional service. So kindly deduct 2%. As they are in Bangalore, they are discuss with their auditor and call me back and send mail to me like that. This is a technical service, so do not deduct 10%. Is it correct or?
If generally, right, if he's providing technical services, general understanding is, suppose something gets out of order in your doing a repair services, those kind of thing. There is always a contention which comes under what. And as I told you, whenever there is in doubt, better go in for 194.
10% higher rate of
10%. Otherwise, person deducting only will be into trouble.
Yeah.
So, okay, see, technical services, it has been defined as managerial, technical, and including supply of labor for these services. So, again, that's what, right? You can say ERP is a technical services, but then subsequently, if it gets into, they say it is a professional services, then it is a problem. I come as a consultant, to provide, say, business analysis or design for development of ERP. You are developing ERP for your company, or you are implementing ERP. You engage a person to come and provide consulting services on this category. Definitely it is 194J, because they come under professional. They are providing you professional services.
Okay.
As a whole, suppose an ERP is implemented, you make a payment, and say you engage, saying that no, you pay a maintenance charge on a regular basis. ERP generally does that. Then you can apply technical services.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. You also.
Yeah.
Anybody else has any question?
Sir, again, one question on the same point. ERP gives ERP with the, if you done with the annual contract, then what will be the charges?
AMC, you can put it under technical services and deduct at 2%. It should not be a problem.
It is a technical service or 194C contract, where we are going for any contract, no, with the software developer.
Okay, under any category, it comes under 2%, so it really does not matter. You will not violate any provision.
Okay.
Essentially, these things are based. They get into dispute only because of the rate.
Okay, sir.
Any other questions, please?
Hello, sir. This is Sampath here. Sir, one confusion in I have one confusion in a 194 IA. It's a immovable property. Sir, there you told it's a 50 lakhs, and if it crosses 52 lakhs, there the TDS will be charged on the balance 2 lakhs, or it is a total on the 52
Entire
lakhs?
amount. See, all the provisions of TDS, when it crosses the limit, the TDS becomes applicable on the entire amount.
Okay.
You remember this in
it,
TDS? Any
yes.
sections in TDS, when it crosses the limit, TDS is applicable on the entire amount.
Okay, sir.
Any other questions? Well, if there are no more questions, then we'll call it a day. Thank you all once again for joining our session. Hope to see you in the next section. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.